Tonight's mystery plunges us into Nero Wolfe's Brownstone, where a midnight phone call, a scorched canvas, and a vanished painting pull Archie into the dangerous world of the Furnace Club, and an arsonist who paints with fire instead of brushes. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Fire in the Brownstone. The night somebody tried to broil our shingles like a cheap cut of steak, I was 3 spoonfuls deep into Fritz's leftover custard and congratulating myself on discovering a late-night purpose in life. I wasn't expecting adventure, I was expecting bed. So, when the office phone let out its long-distance wail at 12:23 a.m., I froze mid-bite, wondering if the universe had mistaken our number for the fire department's. On the second ring, I was already out of my chair, and on the third, I grabbed the receiver before Wolfe could descend in righteous fury upon Bell Telephone and demand punitive damages for interrupting his beauty sleep. Nero Wolfe's residence, I announced, aiming for crisp professionalism, though the custard probably lingered in my tone. Archie Goodwin speaking. A woman's breath fluttered into my ear, shaken, hurried, but not hysterical. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I need Mr. Wolfe immediately. There's been a fire. It wasn't meant to destroy anything, it was meant to warn me." Now, a midnight damsel in distress isn't new to my line of work, but one who leads with arson as personal stationery earns a closer listen. "A fire where?" I asked. "At your brownstone," she whispered. That got my full attention. "Lady, I live here." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm calling. Please. I'm Delia Moresby. I manage the Halcyon Gallery in Midtown, and somebody set that fire to send a message to me, not you." I kept her talking, partly because the phrase "somebody set that fire" doesn't pair well with midnight, and partly because the hall outside Wolfe's room was now emitting an unhappy rumble I recognized. "How do you know the fire was intended for you?" I asked. "The flames started near your receiving door. There was a scorched piece of canvas left beside it. It's from a painting connected to me, to my gallery, to the Furnace Club." At the mention of a club, the rumbling behind me grew louder, and I swung around to find Wolfe himself, filling the doorway in a pair of yellow pajamas that should never have been manufactured in any civilized decade. His expression suggested deep personal offense by the hour, the phone, the universe, and possibly me. "Confounded Archie," he grumbled. "End that call." "It's for you," I said sweetly, then returned to the receiver. "Miss Moresby, you still there?" "Yes, I'm outside your brownstone now." Well, that beat everything. "Come in," I told her. "But for the record, if the arsonist wanted to barbecue us, he should have waited until after breakfast. Fritz makes a divine saffron omelette." Wolfe closed his eyes, presumably counting to 10 in a language nobody speaks anymore. He could have pulled rank and stomped back upstairs, but something in my tone must have hinted that the conversation merited attention. Or perhaps he realized ignoring a midnight caller standing on his stoop wasn't compatible with self-preservation. The bell rang at that precise moment. Wolfe muttered something that might have been a Balkan curse and lowered himself into his office chair with the weariness of Caesar reviewing battlefield reports. "You will admit her," he said, waving a hand, "and then you will explain this absurdity." I opened the door to find Delia Moresby exactly as she had sounded, poised but trembling at the edges. She wore a tailored coat the colour of storm clouds and carried the faint scent of smoke, not the domestic kind, but the acrid tang of something that shouldn't have been burning. She stepped inside as though crossing a threshold into sanctuary, her eyes darting toward the charred spot on the stone near our receiving door. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I never meant to bring danger to your home." "Ma'am," I offered, "danger has visited before. It rarely likes the hospitality." She didn't smile. She swallowed. In the office, Wolfe sat upright, hands folded, the picture of judicial impatience. "Miss Moresby," he said, "explain." She inhaled. "I need your help. I believe someone is threatening me over a painting, one I handled as part of a controversial acquisition. It was created by Raymond Lusk, a member of a Greenwich Village group called the Furnace Club. They weren't ordinary artists. Their work hid messages, symbols, codes." Wolfe lifted one eyebrow. "I am not a cryptographer." "No," she agreed. "But someone thinks I have Lusk's final painting, and that painting supposedly contains a code revealing something he hid before he died. I swear I don't have it. But Garrick Pell, Another member believes I do. And Iris Vale is missing. She vanished 2 weeks ago. This was already more art drama than I'd consumed in a lifetime, and I once dated a sculptor who considered chiseling soap bars a revolutionary act. Delia fumbled in her coat and pulled out a half-burned fragment. "This was left outside your door," she whispered. "It's from Lusk's piece, Heart of the Ashes." I stepped closer. Even with the edges singed, the smear of crimson and the jagged black strokes were deliberate, surreal, sharp, symbolic. And I'd swear I'd seen the pigment pattern somewhere before, though I couldn't place it. "You're sure this belongs to the original painting?" "Yes." Lusk used a rare pigment blend, hematite red with a resin that crackles uniquely under heat. Only he did it. Wolfe extended a hand. I passed it over, careful not to brush it too long. He studied it with the expression he reserves for rare orchid diseases and political speeches. "Someone burned this intentionally," he declared, "to deface the original work or to communicate that they can." "And the fire at your door," she said, voice quivering, "was to frighten you into refusing my case so I'd have nowhere to run." Wolfe grunted. "If intimidation was the objective, it was executed poorly. I do not react well to coercion." He set the fragment on his desk blotter with delicate distaste. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "You will see if anyone observed activity outside at the relevant hour, though it is unlikely. Our neighbours doze with the diligence of cattle." Then, "Miss Moresby, have you been threatened directly?" Her lip trembled. "Pell came to my apartment yesterday. He accused me of stealing Lusk's painting and told me he would ignite the truth. He scares me. But I didn't go to the police. The Furnace Club has a reputation. I feared it would look like internal squabbling over art." "That," I said, "would be the first time internal squabbling didn't interest the police." Wolfe shot me a glance. "Archie, restraint." I nodded, though not apologetically. Delia pressed on. "When the fire began near your door, I thought, if I don't seek help now, I may not be alive tomorrow." Wolfe sighed, a long one that suggested the weight of civilization rested entirely on his shoulders, and he wasn't pleased with the architect. "Miss Moresby, you have already involved me. The preliminary consultation is complete. If you wish formal engagement, we will discuss terms." I opened my mouth. Retainer negotiation time is my cue, but he held up a finger. "After," he said. "I wish first to know what you omitted." She blinked. "Omitted?" "Yes, you are frightened. Yet fear alone does not bring scorched canvases to my doorstep. There is a detail you have withheld." Her shoulders sagged. "All right," she breathed. 3 months ago, Lusk approached me privately. He wanted me to sell Heart of the Ashes off the record. I refused. The gallery has strict policies. He left angry. 2 weeks later he died, allegedly from a fall, but— "A red herring," I said lightly. "People fall all the time without leaving surrealist breadcrumbs." She didn't appreciate it. Wolfe ignored me. "Continue." "After his death, someone broke into the gallery storage area. Nothing was taken except the logbook page documenting Lusk's final painting. Pell accused me. Iris vanished. Then 2 nights ago, a fragment of the painting appeared inside my apartment door. And tonight," she gestured helplessly toward the burned stone outside. The custard in my stomach was starting to curdle. Wolfe tapped his finger against the desk. "You believe this code, this hidden message, is significant?" Delia nodded. "Rumour said the Furnace Club pooled funds secretly for some grand artistic project, but the money was never found. Pell thinks the painting reveals where it went." "And do you believe it?" "I don't know, but someone does, enough to threaten me." Silence pressed in. Wolfe stared at her the way he evaluates trout courses, slowly, with suspicion and imagination. Finally he spoke. "Very well. I accept your case. Archie will draft the contract in the morning. But understand this, any deception on your part will terminate our association immediately." "I understand." He pulled the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the doorway, hair neatly arranged even at midnight. "Yes, sir?" "Beer," Wolfe said. Then, with an exasperated glance at me, "1 glass only. My nerves require sedation." I smirked. "If the arsonist returns, I'll tell him to schedule appointments outside beer o'clock." Wolfe muttered "Fui" under his breath, which in our household is the equivalent of an affectionate pat. Delia clutched her coat. "Will I be safe here tonight?" Wolfe hesitated, then looked at me. Archie will arrange suitable accommodations. And Miss Moresby? His gaze sharpened. Threatening Mr. Goodwin, intentionally or otherwise, is ill-advised. He is essential to the functioning of this establishment. I winked at her. Wolfe's version of a lullaby. It wasn't much, but she managed a fragile nod. The fire outside crackled faintly in the night breeze. The charred canvas fragment lay on the desk like a riddle, and somewhere in Manhattan a killer twisted surrealist symbols into warnings. We had accepted the case. Morning sunlight has an irritating habit of behaving like nothing catastrophic ever happened the night before, and that particular morning it slanted across West 35th Street with the smugness of a cat finding its favourite cushion exactly where it left it. I stepped out of the Brownstone with Inspector Kramer at my side, which was not my preferred breakfast companion, though his cigar kept the pigeons away. The fire crew had already packed up, leaving behind the faint perfume of char, wet brick, and procedural indignation. The damage wasn't dramatic, just a blackened patch by the receiving door and a scorch mark on the stone, but it was pointed. Someone had meant to rattle us, and judging by the fact that I hadn't yet had my coffee, they had succeeded. Kramer crouched near the darkened spot, poking it with one finger as though the soot might leap up and confess. His cigar glowed low and angry, reflecting his mood. "Your boy picked up the accelerant residue just before dawn," he muttered. "Chem team says it wasn't splashed randomly. Someone poured it in a shape." "What shape?" I asked. He glared at me through the smoke. "An oval." "Artistic," I offered. "Maybe the arsonist is moonlighting as a gallery intern." He grunted. "Don't start. This is serious, Archie. My phone rang off the hook at 6 a.m. The DA wants to know if somebody's taking shots at Wolfe, and the commissioner wants to know if somebody's using your building as an art project. One more mess on my desk." I clucked sympathetically. "Your desk must look like a clearance sale." His jaw tightened, but he let it slide, professional exhaustion masquerading as tolerance. We circled the perimeter, while he explained that a witness had reported a figure moving east around 1 a.m., no details besides a dark coat and a purposeful stride. In Manhattan, that narrowed it down to roughly 1 million suspects. "You tell Wolfe I'll need statements from both of you," Kramer said. "He'll enjoy that as much as you enjoy poetry readings." Kramer's mouth twitched. "Just do it." We went inside before Wolfe could accuse us of letting cold air in. Breakfast was underway in the dining room, Fritz's omelette steaming, Wolfe already seated with the dignified scowl of a man whose morning has been compromised. He held Delia's payment envelope between thumb and forefinger, the way he might inspect a suspicious mushroom. "This," Wolfe declared, "is insufficient." Delia, who sat rigid in the guest chair, faltered. I included the initial retainer." "I am aware of what you included," Wolfe said. "I am also aware that your gallery is funded by board members whose combined assets could purchase Manhattan twice over. If I am to be dragged into a conflagration of bohemian symbolism, hidden codes, and amateur arsonists, I expect compensation commensurate with the inconvenience." I slid into my chair across from him. "Meaning, we should ask the board to cough up something appropriate." Wolfe shot me a look. "Archie." "Just translating." Delia swallowed. "I can arrange additional payment." "I hope so," Wolfe replied, and applied himself to Fritz's omelette with the gravity of a man consulting scripture. When breakfast concluded, Wolfe refusing beer because it was still too close to noon, we retired to the office for formal questioning. Wolfe settled into his chair and gestured for Delia to begin. Her hands shook slightly as she removed her gloves. "Last night," she said, "I told you about Raymond Lusk, Iris Vale, and Garrick Pell. They were the 3 core artists of the Furnace Club. The others drifted in and out, but those 3, everything revolved around them." I took my notebook. "Let's start with Lusk. He's the dead one." She nodded. Raymond Lusk was brilliant but unstable. His work depicted surreal scenes, melting frames, burning silhouettes, impossible architecture. He believed images could hold coded messages, patterns, layers. "Sounds like a fellow who would have enjoyed chess problems," I remarked. Wolfe ignored me, though I caught a flicker of annoyance that wasn't entirely genuine. Delia continued. "His last painting, Heart of the Ashes, vanished shortly after he died. The gallery never received it. Iris Vale claims she never saw it. Pell insisted I stole it." "Why would he insist that?" I asked. "He fixated on me, said I was the only one with enough sense to protect the painting. But when I refused to help him exhibit more of Lusk's work privately, he grew angry. "Define angry," I said. "He broke into my apartment once," she whispered. I stopped writing. "You didn't mention that last night." Her cheeks flushed. I was ashamed. I thought if I admitted how he'd threatened me, it would sound like I had provoked him. Wolfe sat forward. "Deception," he said coldly, "will void our engagement." Delia's voice trembled. "I'm sorry, I was afraid. Fear is not a license for a mission." Before she could respond, the bell rang. Fritz appeared at the doorway, never from the kitchen because Fritz does not holler like an auctioneer. "Inspector Kramer, sir," Wolfe sighed. "Show him in." Kramer entered with his cigar as identification, eyeing Delia with a look that mixed suspicion and professional curiosity. "Miss Moresby," he said curtly, "you might have warned us your art circle's going up in flames. Literally." "I've explained everything," she began. "No," Kramer interrupted. "You explained everything you wanted to. Goodwin here tells me the accelerant pattern outside was no accident. Oval, like a frame." "Like a painting," I added. He shot me a look for helping too much. I grinned. Delia opened her purse, hesitated, then pulled out another charred fragment of canvas. "I found this," she whispered, "inside my apartment door, before I came here last night." Kramer leaned forward, cigar tip glowing brighter. "You're telling me someone broke into your place, left evidence, then set a fire at Wolfe's home. Why?" "I don't know," she said desperately, "but it all started after Lusk died." I took the fragment with care. No original evidence leaves my hands except to return to the police. The pigment was the same strange crimson with that odd resin crackle. "Someone is planting clues," I murmured, "like breadcrumbs." Kramer snorted. "Breadcrumbs burn." "Everything burns if you try hard enough," I said. He looked ready to protest, but Wolfe raised a hand. "Inspector." Kramer exhaled smoke with irritation. "Look, Wolfe, I know your patience for law enforcement is as thin as my budget, but this is serious. Someone pulled a stunt on your doorstep. That means political pressure. The commissioner wants progress by noon." "Noon is orchid time," Wolfe said blandly. Kramer glared. "Fine. After your flowers. But don't make me drag you into court for a statement." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Inspector, you are in my home, and Miss Moresby is my client. You will not badger her as though she were a delinquent clerk." Kramer stiffened. "I'm not badgering anyone. I'm doing my job." "Then do it with restraint." A moment of silence stretched, taut as piano wire. Then Kramer's shoulders eased. "All right, Wolfe," he said quietly. "I'll wait for your report." An olive branch from Kramer is rarer than an honest politician, but Wolfe accepted it with a nod. I turned to Delia. "Tell us about Iris Vale." "She was gentle, talented. Lusk trusted her more than anyone. 2 weeks ago she vanished. Some say she went away to clear her mind. Others say Pell threatened her. He had a temper." "And now," I said, "your apartment's been decorated with charred confetti." Wolfe's gaze darkened. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Just observing." We spent another half hour piecing together Delia's timeline. Lusk's death, Iris's disappearance, Pell's accusations. She was consistent, but fear hung around her like a mist. At one point she faltered describing Pell's last threat, and I offered a glass of water. Wolfe observed with something like approval before returning his attention to the evidence. Finally he said, "Miss Moresby, you may go. Archie will type a preliminary report for Inspector Kramer. We shall proceed after orchid hours." Kramer grumbled but didn't argue. Delia rose shakily and thanked us. As she left, Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. "This intrusion of bohemian theatrics into my routine is unacceptable," I shrugged. "You could always return the retainer." Wolfe opened one eye. "Pfui," typed the report. "Right after coffee," I said, because even in the shadow of arson, a man has priorities. And as I headed for the machine, the scent of charred paint lingered in the hallway, a little reminder that someone out there was treating our brownstone like a canvas, and we were now part of the composition. The trick to visiting a dead art movement's clubhouse at 10:30 on a grey Manhattan morning is to pretend you're immune to dust, disappointment, and the pungent aroma of turpentine that clings to your suit like a needy relative. I tried that approach as I stepped into the old Furnace Club studio, but the place hit me with a welcome more despairing than my last tax bill. Sunlight sliced through cracked windows, catching suspended motes that swirled like ghosts rehearsing choreography. Canvases slumped against the walls as if they'd given up on ever being masterpieces, and a broken easel lay on its side like a collapsed drunk after a bohemian party no one bothered to clean up. Saul Pantzer emerged from the shadows with his usual unassuming grace. If Saul ever startled me, I'd worry about my nerves. He wore his flat cap pulled low, his expression as calm as a librarian at midnight. "Morning, Archie," he said. "Morning," I replied. "Aye. What have you got besides ambience?" Saul nodded toward a cracked window that overlooked the street. "I tailed Garrick Pell last night as instructed. He circled back to your place at 1 a.m., shortly after the fire brigade left, stood across the street and watched the Brownstone for about 10 minutes. Then he walked east." "Any chance he was admiring our architecture?" "Not unless he's recently developed a fondness for soot patterns." Saul's voice stayed neutral. He didn't approach the door again. "That's something," I said, though privately I filed it under opportunity, not guilt. Pell, visiting the scene right after the flames died out, raised eyebrows, but not enough to convict a jaywalker. Saul continued. "He hasn't contacted Delia Moresby directly in the last 24 hours, but he bought art supplies, charcoal, solvent, canvas patches, at a shop on 8th Avenue. "Painting?" I said. "Or destroying paintings?" "Could be either. That was Saul for you, never jumping ahead, never overreaching, always giving me the data without the drama." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep with him. If he buys gasoline next, I want to know." Saul inclined his head. "Call if you need me," he said, and slipped out with a silence that should have been patented. Alone now, I let the studio swallow me. The floorboards creaked with the exaggerated sighs of old wood. The walls were streaked with decades of artistic ambition, some of it genius, most of it enthusiastic trash. Someone had left open jars of pigment that now resembled geological samples. The Furnace Club had once been the beating heart of a Greenwich Village revolt, the kind of place critics called dangerously original, while secretly checking for fire exits. I moved deeper, scanning the room for clues Wolfe had predicted. He'd told me, in one of his rare moments of pure deduction drama, that artists incapable of subtlety leave traces even when they try not to. And sure enough, behind a battered screen, I found a half-finished canvas propped on an easel. It stopped me cold. The painting showed a brownstone, our brownstone, engulfed in surreal flames rendered in exaggerated crimsons and blacks, windows bent at impossible angles, twisting as if in agony, and in one of the warped panes lurked a small black silhouette, a human figure, indistinct but unmistakably trapped. The signature at the bottom corner, Lusk's, had been smeared deliberately, a drag of paint that suggested a hasty attempt to hide authorship. "Well," I muttered, "that's a friendly Valentine." A man who paints a burning brownstone before one actually gets ignited is either prophetic, guilty, or concerned about heating bills. I bent for a closer look. Wolfe's theory about coded images tickled the back of my mind. The brushstrokes near the silhouette seemed layered with meaning, though maybe that was just me trying to imagine what surrealists think about while they're painting. Probably nothing as practical as avoiding homicide charges. "I see you found one of Raymond's lesser tantrums," a voice announced behind me. I pivoted. Enter Marta Quill, the art critic who had made a career out of lauding the Furnace Club until it imploded, at which point she jumped ship faster than a reporter spotting a better scandal. She was tall, angular, dressed in a coat too fashionable for the dust zone. Her hair was coiled in a bun that suggested tight opinions. "Marta," I said, "you move quiet for someone who publishes loud." She sniffed. "This studio is open to anyone who remembers what genius used to look like. I come here to reflect." "Looks more like you come here to brood," I said. "Different verbs, similar posture." She crossed her arms. "Delia Moresby sent you, didn't she? I suppose she wants to control the narrative of Raymond Lusk's legacy. She always was calculating." "Funny," I said lightly. "She implied you were the one with a habit of rewriting history." Marta bristled. "Delia manipulated Pell emotionally and financially. Everyone knew it. She forged provenance documents for Lusk's final work, and now she's pretending it was stolen. Typical. Red herring alert. Marta was pushing this too hard, too fast. Either she believed every word or she was laying it on thicker than Fritz's chocolate glaze. "Interesting theory," I said. "Any evidence besides your gift for adjectives?" Marta glared. Raymond trusted Iris, not Delia. Iris vanished. Pell snapped. Raymond died under suspicious circumstances. And now Delia claims the painting is missing. Please. Suspicious circumstances? I asked. He fell, she said dismissively. But artists like Raymond don't simply fall. They collapse under betrayal. I grinned. That's poetic. But unless the DA hires you, it won't hold up in court. She huffed. You detectives never understand art. Everything is surface to you. Believe me, I said, I appreciate surfaces. Her expression suggested she'd like to sharpen a palette knife on my forehead. If you want truth, look at Delia. She's desperate to control Lusk's legacy. She probably burned that fragment herself. There it was. The accusation delivered with such practiced venom it practically sparkled. But her eagerness to point the finger at Delia rang like a cracked bell. I'll keep that in mind, I said, not keeping it in mind at all, except as one more piece of theatre. Got anything else? She hesitated, then gestured at the burning brownstone painting. He painted that after Pell shouted at him, said Wolfe would destroy everything if he ever saw the coded work. Raymond feared outsiders. Too late, I said. We're here now. She exited with a swirl of coat fabric, leaving behind the faint smell of strong perfume and stronger resentment. I snapped a few mental photographs of the painting, its angles, its palette, the silhouette in the window, then made my way back uptown to the Brownstone. It was nearly 11, which meant Wolfe was in orchid mode, unreachable unless the building collapsed. I typed up notes while waiting, though every keystroke felt like vandalizing the peace of the office. At 11:03, the elevator rumbled and Wolfe descended with the ponderous dignity of a monarch returning from meditation. He entered the office, lowered himself into the chair and closed his eyes. Report, he commanded. I gave him everything. Saul's tailing of Pell, the late-night visit to our soot-scarred doorstep, the art supplies, the half-finished painting depicting our brownstone on fire, the smeared signature, Marta's performance and accusations, and my conclusion that the Furnace Club had produced more drama than art. Wolfe steepled his fingers, eyes closed, breathing slow. The fragments, he murmured. The burned pieces. They are not threats. No? They are pieces, he said, of a whole. Map pieces. I blinked. You're telling me we're in a treasure hunt now. Should I buy a compass? Do not be imbecilic, Wolfe snapped with more sharpness than bite. Images, Archie. The surrealists believed symbolism could contain direction. You realize you're sounding like an art critic. His eyes opened sharply. That is insufferable. As punishment, you will fetch photostats from the Halcyon Gallery archives. I groaned. Those people think wearing black makes them intellectual. Go, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Return before lunch, and do not antagonize anyone unnecessarily. I only antagonize necessarily, I said. Wolfe muttered, "Phooey," and closed his eyes again, already drifting toward whatever orchid-related thoughts carried him through the noon hour. I grabbed my hat and headed out the door. The burning brownstone painting lingered in my mind like a bad premonition, reminding me that somewhere in this surrealist labyrinth, someone was all too willing to set scenes on fire just to make a point. If there's a proper way to storm a Midtown art gallery without getting arrested or mistaken for performance art, nobody has ever told me. So I settled for something just short of a storm, call it a brisk atmospheric disturbance, as I pushed through the glass doors of the Halcyon Gallery at 11:19 a.m. The air inside smelled like imported varnish, ambition, and money that had never known the inside of a working man's wallet. The walls were a parade ground of oversized canvases that tried so hard to impress you could practically hear them panting. A trio of wealthy browsers floated past me, all cheekbones and indifference, and one of them gifted me a glance that suggested I didn't belong in their oxygen supply. I smiled sweetly. In a place like this, a grin is as disruptive as a grenade. I had barely taken 3 steps before a polished, tidy obstacle positioned itself directly in my path. Brandon Kell, Delia Moresby's supervisor. If charm could be lacquered, he'd have needed 2 coats. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack walnuts, though his voice tried for velvet. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "this is a surprise." "It shouldn't be," I said. "Miss Moresby is consulting Wolfe. That means I'm consulting your filing cabinets." Kell's smile wavered. I'm not sure we can permit that. Let's imagine you can, I said warmly. And if imagination is difficult, I have Wolfe on retainer and an inspector with a cigar the size of a nightstick who'd love an excuse to visit. Kell inhaled, probably resisting the urge to burst into flame. What exactly are you looking for? Photostats, I said, relevant to Raymond Lusk and the Furnace Club. His eyes flicked sideways. Those archives are private. Not today, I said, stepping past him. If you want to escort me like a gentleman, be my guest. If not, I'm housebroken. Kell weighed his options, then decided resistance would wrinkle his suit. Fine, he said tightly. Follow me. He led me down a narrow hallway that hummed with fluorescent lighting and the tension of employees pretending not to notice drama. The archive door loomed ahead, locked with a keypad. Kell punched in the code, glancing at me like I was a pickpocket studying his technique. Inside, the archive room contrasted the gallery's glamour with rows of metal filing cabinets, stacked boxes, and a long central table covered in paperwork. The overhead bulbs flickered occasionally, a reminder that even fashionable institutions cut corners somewhere. If you would please specify precisely what you need, Kell said, I can retrieve it for you. Oh, I'm sure you could, I replied, but I'm old-fashioned. I prefer to get my own hands dirty. I was already moving toward the L-section cabinets. Where do you keep logbooks? His jaw pulsed. On the back shelf. Thank you kindly. I might have followed up with more needling, but someone else entered the room, a young woman with dark curls pinned haphazardly, carrying a stack of envelopes she nearly dropped when she saw me. Lydia Arno, intern and certified creature of the bohemian adjacent world. Her eyes held too much nervous intelligence to be comfortable. Oh, she breathed. You're Archie Goodwin, I supplied, one of Wolfe's minions. Her lips twitched. We don't usually get detectives in the archives. You should try it, I said. Adds excitement. Where can I find Lusk's acquisition records? She glanced at Kell, who gave her the kind of smile that warns interns not to make career-ending choices. But Lydia stepped closer to me anyway, lowering her voice. You're here about the missing painting, aren't you? I raised an eyebrow. What missing painting? She swallowed. Heart of the Ashes. Raymond Lusk brought it here once. I saw it with my own eyes. A huge abstract piece, reds and blacks like an explosion caught mid-breath. He said it was his masterpiece. Kell cut in sharply. Lydia, she ignored him. It disappeared the same week Delia started cataloguing his portfolio. She said she never saw it, but that's not true. She hid it. I leaned one elbow on the filing cabinet. That's a bold allegation. Any proof? Her fingers knotted together. Just what I saw. Delia was always close to Lusk, closer than she admits. Maybe she wanted the painting for herself. Red herring? Maybe, but her sincerity was too raw to be rehearsed. Delia might have been hiding something, but Lydia's desperation to spill her version of events came from someplace real, not necessarily accurate, but emotional truth has its own scent. Kell moved between us like a human partition. That will be enough, Lydia. She stepped back reluctantly, giving me a pleading look as she left the room. When she was gone, I said, Your interns gossip like poets. You might want to lock the vault. Kell's nostrils flared. Lydia is young and impressionable. She misremembers things. Miss Moresby has been exemplary in her stewardship of this gallery. Sure, I said. Which is why someone tried to toast my brownstone. He stiffened. We had nothing to do with that. I'll be delighted if that's true, I replied, and opened the gallery's logbook. Now, I've flipped through plenty of logbooks. Police, hotel, shipping, even one documenting dog breeding schedules. But art logs have their own flair. Each entry catalogued paintings acquired, loaned or sold, with neat handwriting and dated annotations. When I reached the section marked Lusk, my eye caught something odd. An erasure. Not a sloppy one either. A careful scraping and rewriting, barely noticeable unless you looked hard. The entry for Heart of the Ashes had been removed, then rewritten in a different hand. Interesting, I murmured. Kell stepped closer. What is? This, the erasure. I tapped the spot. Someone tried to rewrite this painting's history. Kell's throat tightened. Record-keeping is an imperfect process. I bet. I photographed the page in my notebook, No originals leave my custody, and closed the logbook with a thump. Before I could press Kell further, my phone buzzed. I stepped away and answered. Archie Goodwin. Saul Pantzer's calm voice drifted through. Update for you. Pell just purchased 2 gallons of accelerant from a supply shop on West 37th. I whistled softly. That's on the suspicious side of timely. Yes, Saul agreed, but he didn't seem in a rush, walked out calm as a monk. Thanks, stay with him. As I hung up, Wolfe's number flashed next. I answered. Archie. Wolfe's voice was a basso rumble of controlled annoyance. Mr. Goodwin, do not leap. 2 gallons of accelerant are circumstantial. Pell is volatile, but not necessarily homicidal. Understood, I said. I'm merely collecting the dots. You can connect them later with your usual disdain. He snorted softly. Finish your task and return before lunch. Working on it. I pocketed the phone. Kell eyed me warily. Something new? Nothing you need to worry about unless you've recently taken up pyromania. I grabbed the photostats I needed and headed for the door. Thanks for the hospitality. You're disrupting operations, he snapped. Sir, I replied with a grin, your operations looked disrupted before I got here. Back at the Brownstone, the atmosphere was calmer, meaning Wolfe was deep in thought and the orchids were safe for another hour. He sat in his chair when I entered the office, heavy-lidded but alert beneath the surface. I handed him the photostats, the notes, and my impressions of Lydia and Kell. When I finished, Wolfe exhaled through his nose. The code, he murmured. If Lusk hid information within Heart of the Ashes, it would inevitably concern the Furnace Club's collective funds. Funds, I said. I thought they lived off cigarettes and pretension. Not entirely. Rumour suggests they pooled resources for a grand work. The money vanished after Lusk's death. He opened one eye. Everyone you spoke to has motive. Pell, Delia, Kell, Lydia, even Marta Quill. They believe the painting leads to the missing funds. So it's a treasure hunt, I said. Modern art edition. Money hidden behind art, Wolfe corrected. The surreal concealed behind the polished. I leaned back. That crowd couldn't tell a Monet from a Monday. Wolfe's lip twitched, his version of a belly laugh. Archie, your ignorance of Impressionism is appalling, but your phrasing is serviceable. Just then, Fritz appeared at the doorway. Lunch is ready, sir. Wolfe rose with relief. Excellent. Archie, do not antagonize the gallery staff further without cause. Who? Me? I said innocently. His look suggested the conversation was over, and with that ritual closure we adjourned, our meal waiting, our mystery deepening, and our suspects multiplying like abstract patterns on a painter's palette. By the time Inspector Kramer phoned at 12:08, I had just convinced Fritz to surrender a second cup of coffee on humanitarian grounds. The ring sliced through the Brownstone with the authority of a man who never used a polite knock when a battering ram would do, and before Wolfe could bellow for silence, I answered. Goodwin. Kramer's voice rasped like a tuba with a head cold. Get down to Garrick Pell's studio, now. Bring Wolfe if he'll move, but I'm guessing he won't, so just get here. I'm not a delivery boy for crime scenes, I said, but your charm is overwhelming. What happened? Pell is dead, Kramer growled, and this time the smoke has nothing to do with Wolfe's doorstep. That rearranged my morning. I told Wolfe I was leaving, and because he disliked both surprises and delays, he demanded details. Pell's dead, I said, smoke-related. Wolfe's brows lowered. Then go, learn, and be precise. I left immediately. Pell's studio sat on the 3rd floor of a narrow building downtown, the kind landlords call vintage, and tenants call drafty death trap. When I arrived, the hallway was milky with lingering artificial smoke. Uniformed men were airing the place out, while a forensics locksmith battled the jammed door with tools that looked like instruments of medieval persuasion. Kramer spotted me and waved me inside with a grunt. His cigar drooped at an angle that said he'd already lost patience with the universe. In here, he snapped. The studio was a cramped disaster of scattered canvases, paint-stained rags, and the overwhelming scent of chemicals trying to disguise the fact that someone had launched a smoke bomb, as if announcing the world's most depressing parade. In the centre of the room lay Garrick Pell, sprawled beside an overturned stool. His eyes were open in the frozen surprise of a man who either didn't expect death or expected it differently. His fingers were curled stiffly, stained with that same crimson-black pigment I'd seen on the burnt fragments left for Delia and Wolfe. Smoke inhalation, Kramer said, but no actual fire. Whoever did this wanted drama, not destruction. So they staged it, I said, crouching. Arson without flame, the visual without the consequences. A theme, Kramer muttered. Your pal Wolfe was right. Someone's staging art nonsense like it's a criminal opera. You're admitting Wolfe is right, I asked. Should I get that in writing? Kramer shot me a glare that could peel paint. Listen, Goodwin, I didn't call you here to flirt with sarcasm. Pell inhaled enough smoke to drop a mule. Smoke bomb on timer in the corner. No sign of struggle. And get this, someone left the damn thing inside an empty paint can. Cute. I stood and dusted off my knees. Any witnesses? One neighbour heard coughing around 10:30, but figured Pell was chain-smoking despair again. Look at his fingers. I did. The pigment crusted around Pell's nails matched the fragment Delia had brought us, the same cracked resin hue Lusk used. Pell had been touching something connected to the painting or the fake pieces someone kept planting. Whether that made him a forger, a thief, or a victim with poor timing was still in debate. Kramer blew smoke upward. I know you won't say it, but Wolfe should hear this firsthand. He may as well take a look from his velvet throne and send down a miracle. I'll relay everything, I said. He won't like the deadline, though. Tell him I'm not asking for charity, Kramer replied. Just answers. I moved through the studio slowly, taking in every corner. There were sketches, splashes of colour, abandoned drafts. On one easel sat a half-line charcoal concept of 3 figures, abstract, distorted, likely Lusk, Pell, and Iris Vale. The lines were jagged, urgent, restless. Pell had been working on something. Whether it was revelation or therapy, we'd never know now. I circled back. Who found him? Saul Panzer, Kramer said. I blinked. Saul? Relax, he added. He was tailing Pell, saw the smoke leaking from the window and went inside. By the time he got him out, Pell was already gone. Saul appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, calm as always. Archie, Inspector. You all right? I asked. Fine. Pell wasn't, Saul said quietly. He was already unconscious when I reached him. No burns, no wounds, just smoke. You see anyone leaving? No, but someone was here before me. Window latch was still warm. I catalogued that. You tell Wolfe yet? Not yet, Saul said. Wanted you to see it first. Kramer cleared his throat. Goodwin, take whatever notes Wolfe needs, but I want a report by this afternoon. I gave him a salute. As you command, Captain Cigar. If he hadn't been standing over a corpse, he'd have slugged me. Back at the Brownstone, I found Wolfe in his office, settled like a deity waiting for tribute. I reported everything, from the smoke bomb to the pigment on Pell's fingers. When I finished, Wolfe said only one word. So. Not loud, not irritated, but with a weight that suggested several deduction gears were clicking into place. So what? I asked. So, Wolfe repeated, the killer has accelerated the timetable. Death, Mr. Goodwin, is an escalation. Bring Miss Moresby here, now. I phoned her, and she arrived within the hour, pale and tight-lipped. Wolfe gestured for her to sit. She perched on the chair like it might reject her. Miss Moresby, Wolfe began, Mr. Pell is dead. Her breath hitched. Dead? Smoke inhalation, I said gently. No flame. She covered her mouth. I never wanted... Mr. Goodwin, I swear I didn't... Wolfe cut in. Compose yourself. I require information, not lamentation. Pell's death is a consequence of concealments. Yours among them. She froze. Mine? Yes, Wolfe said. You have withheld something of significance. It is no longer tolerable. She trembled. I moved closer, offering a glass of water. She accepted it with shaking hands. Her eyes darted between us. I didn't want to say, she whispered, because it makes me look guilty. Truth often does, Wolfe replied. Proceed. She inhaled a shuddering breath. I sold one of Raymond Lusk's paintings off the books. He asked me to. He needed money urgently. He wouldn't tell me why, but he insisted on secrecy. I agreed. I shouldn't have. Pell found out and blackmailed me. He said he'd accuse me of stealing Heart of the Ashes. There it was. Not innocence, but motive-adjacent guilt. Which painting? I asked. A smaller surrealist piece. Nothing like Heart of the Ashes. But Pell said I was hiding that too. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Is there anything else you would care to reveal before the inspector arrives? She flinched. Yes. She reached into her bag and produced a folded sheet. I received this earlier today. I took it carefully, no original evidence gets pocketed by me, and opened it. A surrealist sketch of our brownstone engulfed in stylized flames, much like the half-finished canvas I'd seen in the Furnace Club studio. And at the bottom corner, a single initial. A. Wolfe leaned in. Archie? Yes? A, he said. For Ashes. The killer is thematically branding the crimes. A for arsonist too, I offered. Wolfe frowned. Do not be facetious. Before I could retort, the bell rang. Fritz appeared at the doorway, proper, silent, solemn. Inspector Kramer, sir. Kramer entered like a storm on legs, though he kept his volume respectable. Miss Moresby, he said, I need clarification about Pell. Wolfe's head snapped toward him. Inspector, you will not corner my client without restraint. Kramer bristled. I'm not cornering her. I'm asking questions. Restraint, Wolfe repeated, softer but heavier. Kramer exhaled loudly through his nose. Fine. Miss Moresby, did Pell threaten you recently? She shook. Yes, but I didn't kill him. I didn't say you did, Kramer replied. I said I need facts. Her hands shook so badly I moved beside her, steadying her elbow. Take your time, I said. Wolfe watched, expression unreadable but protective. Delia managed to recount her admission, the off-book sale, the blackmail, the threats. She described Pell's final visit, his rage, his insistence she had the missing painting. Kramer scribbled. All right, he said. It lines up with what we found, for now. He closed his notebook. Wolfe Goodwin, I'll wait for your report. That was his version of cooperation. He left with Fritz escorting him politely. Wolfe tapped the sketch. The killer is accelerating, and they are confident. Confidence implies proximity, to Lusk, to Pell, to Miss Moresby. I said, and to us. Wolfe grunted. Undoubtedly. Delia whispered, Am I safe? Wolfe replied, No one involved in this matter is safe, least of all those who lie. She shivered, and just like that, orchids or no orchids, the fire without fire had claimed its first life, and promised more. If there's one thing guaranteed to ruin Wolfe's digestion faster than undercooked lamb, it's waking up to find his name blaring across the front page of the Gazette. And that particular morning, as I came down the stairs at 8:23 sharp, I heard a sound emerging from the office that could only be described as a dignified man, attempting not to swear himself into an early grave. By the time I stepped inside, Wolfe was glaring at the newspaper, as though Lon Cohen personally owed him reparations for emotional damage. What fresh hell is this, I asked, though the headline already shouted at me, Arson at Wolfe home tied to Art World feud. A smaller subheader added, Exclusive, Furnace Club mystery heats up. Wolfe thumped the paper down. Confound the press. Cohen's fond of you, I said. Imagine what he prints when he's not feeling affectionate. Wolfe's glare slid from the paper to me. You will telephone Mr. Cohen. Inform him I require background on the Furnace Club's finances. And inform him, he added with venomous restraint, that his choice of adjectives is deplorable. Which adjectives? I asked cheerfully. All, Wolfe snapped. Breakfast concluded without fatalities, though Wolfe stabbed his eggs with more force than required by Swiss culinary etiquette. At 9, he marched upstairs to the orchids, where he would soothe himself by communing with plant life less troublesome than the human variety. That left me to call Cohen, who answered on the second ring sounding far too pleased with himself. Archie, tell me Wolfe liked the headline. Wolfe, I said, would prefer being roasted alive to being roasted in print. That's not off the table yet, Cohen replied. But listen, your boy's in the centre of something big. The Furnace Club is getting the public froth treatment. You seen the letters I got this morning? Cohen, people froth over crossword clues. Focus, he laughed. Fine. Meet me downtown. I'll fill you in. By 10:15 I was pushing through the smoky haze of the Gazette City room, which always smells like ink, ambition, and tobacco having a nervous breakdown. Reporters clattered at typewriters with the seriousness of surgeons trying to save dying metaphors. Cohen waved me over from his desk, surrounded by a fortress of coffee mugs and regret. "You're late," he said. "I came as fast as Manhattan traffic allowed." "So you crawled?" I sat. "What's this Furnace Club connection you teased me with?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted a folder thick with clippings. "You ever hear of the Furnace Fund?" "Sounds like somewhere to keep leftover heat." "Cute. No, it was a trust fund, secret supposedly, set up by the original Furnace Club artists. Lusk, Pell, Vale, a few others. Rumour says they pooled every dime they made from early commissions, tens of thousands, all earmarked for some future collaborative masterpiece that never happened." "What happened instead?" "Lusk died. The money vanished." Cohen leaned back. "And suddenly Wolfe's Brownstone is getting roasted like a holiday goose." "You think the fund's connected?" "I think," he said, lighting a cigarette, "that you don't buy accelerant and burn symbols into people's doorsteps unless you're hiding something large, valuable, and embarrassing. That describes most of New York." "Sure, but only a handful of people had access to that fund." He held up fingers as he ticked them off. Delia Moresby, through the gallery. Brandon Kell, by position and ego. Marta Quill, the critic who championed the early sales. Iris Vale before she vanished. And Pell, who's now dead by smoke. "Convenient timing," I said. "Or tidy." Cohen blew smoke toward the ceiling. "You want my hot take? Iris Vale is dead. Has to be. Artists don't vanish this long without floating to the surface, or showing up in Brooklyn asking for rent money." I shook my head. "No, too neat. When things line up that pretty, someone arranged the pattern, and surrealist killers like patterns." Cohen laughed. "You've been hanging around Wolfe too long. Speaking of patterns, look at this." He shoved a clipping toward me. It was an old interview with Raymond Lusk. A quote jumped out. "My final work will reveal everything, the furnace that purifies." I tapped it. "Metaphor?" "Or," Cohen said, "a map. Depends on how wild your crowd was." I pocketed the note. "Anything else?" "Yeah," he leaned forward. "You tell Wolfe the city's watching. The Gazette loves him, but even we can't save him from the commissioner's heat. That fire on your doorstep made people nervous." "Wolfe hates nervous people," I said. "They vibrate." Cohen snorted. "Well, tell him not to vibrate too hard. And Archie—" His voice softened. "Be careful. Whoever's running this show isn't a lunatic. They're organized. And they're theatrical." Theatrical killers give me a rash, but I didn't say so. I just tipped my hat and left the Gazette before some rookie reporter mistook me for a story he could win an award with. Back at the Brownstone at 11:40, Wolfe had just returned from his orchid sanctuary. If orchids could talk, they would have tattled that his temper was still simmering gently. He sat in his oversized chair, gestured at me, and closed his eyes to listen. I gave him Cohen's breakdown, the trust fund, the vanished money, the list of suspects, the clipping, the metaphor about purification. When I finished, Wolfe opened one eye. "The furnace that purifies," he repeated thoughtfully. "Symbolism. Lusk's medium was metaphor." "Some metaphors kill people," I reminded him. "Yes," Wolfe said, "and the killer wishes to control not merely the actions, but the narrative. Arson that does not burn, smoke that does not consume, threats that depict rather than destroy. Someone is crafting myth, Mr. Goodwin." "New York doesn't need more myths," I said. "It barely handles its realities." He ignored me. "The missing painting likely contains more than art. If it held directions to the trust fund, and if Lusk believed revelation was imminent, others may have taken steps to suppress, retrieve, or exploit it." "So Pell's death," I said, "may have been a cleanup operation." "Or," Wolfe murmured, "a prelude." He fell silent, thinking. I've seen Wolfe contemplate many horrors, bad sources, sloppy reasoning, office dust, but none gave him the same look as a killer trying to compose a narrative with smoke. "Archie," he said at last, "you will not take unnecessary risks downtown." That threw me. Wolfe doesn't usually comment on risk unless it affects his dinner plans. I wasn't aware I had. "I am." His tone softened infinitesimally. "You are too visible. This killer is theatrical. They will be tempted to incorporate you." "Well," I said lightly, "I've always wanted to be part of the art world." Wolfe glared at me. "Phooey, be serious." "I am. I'll be careful." He grunted, which in Wolfe's emotional vocabulary is the equivalent of a warm hug. Before I could needle him further, the bell rang. I checked the clock. 12:05 p.m. Fritz never appears before noon with beer, and Wolfe wouldn't expect lunch for nearly an hour, so this was someone else. Fritz appeared at the doorway. "Delivery, sir." A messenger handed me an envelope addressed to Wolfe in looping handwriting. Inside was a clipping from an art review. A sentence was circled. "The Furnace Club believe destruction reveals truth." Below it, in ink, someone had written, "Smoke is only the beginning." Wolfe took it between two fingers like it was a diseased leaf. "So," he said, "our adversary is not merely theatrical, they are communicative." "Friendly correspondence from killers is never a good sign," I noted. He leaned back. "The press fans the flames, the killer answers them, and the city watches for spectacle. This is intolerable." "Welcome to New York." Wolfe fixed me with a look heavy enough to pin butterflies. "Archie, you will promise me—" But he didn't finish, because at that exact moment the office filled with the faint but unmistakable smell of smoke drifting through the open transom window. Not thick, not urgent, but present. A reminder, a warning, a hook for the next act. Wolfe inhaled sharply. "Close the window." I did, and when I turned back to him, his eyes were open, bright, furious, and afraid for someone other than himself. If there's one thing you learn in my line of work, it's that when Saul Panzer phones you before noon, you answer before the second ring drops dead. And that morning, at 9:46, he did just that. His voice was calm, but with a tautness beneath it that meant he'd hooked something important. "Archie," he said, "you'll want to come down to the Lower East Side. I've found her." Her didn't need clarification. Iris Vale, the vanished surrealist, the ghost of the Furnace Club, the woman everyone assumed was either dead or hiding under a pile of Bohemian scarves. If Saul said he had her, then he had her. And if he had her, then I had something to tell Wolfe that might finally make the big man's eyebrows rise instead of fall. 10 minutes later, I was weaving through the cracked sidewalks and battered storefronts of a neighborhood that smelled like yesterday's steam heat and old ambitions. Saul leaned against a lamppost, hands in pockets, looking like just another man contemplating whether life or the city would break first. "You're sure?" I asked. He nodded once. "Basement apartment. She's scared, and she'll only talk to you." "Why me?" He shrugged. "You're less frightening than Wolfe." That's one interpretation. The building was a 4-story brick relic, its windows dusty enough to qualify as privacy guards. Saul led me down a narrow staircase into a basement corridor lit by a single naked bulb that flickered with the work ethic of a dying firefly. At the third door he knocked softly. A moment later it cracked open just enough for one dark eye to appear. "Miss Vale," Saul said gently, "this is Archie Goodwin. He works for Nero Wolfe." The door opened farther, reluctantly. Iris Vale stood there, thin, tense, wrapped in a grey sweater that looked like it had survived more tragedies than most people. Her hair, once described by critics as storm-wild, now hung in muted curls around a face carved by fear. She studied me with a trembling suspicion. "I don't trust anyone connected to the gallery," she said. "Good," I replied, "neither do I." That earned me the ghost of a smirk. She stepped aside and let us in. Her apartment was small, neat, and lived in by someone who'd learned to live quietly. Canvases leaned against the walls, half-finished pieces showing slashes of crimson and copper. A cup of cold tea sat beside a sketchpad. Cigarette smoke threaded through the air like a nervous shadow. I took a seat. She didn't. "I shouldn't be talking to you," she began, voice wavering. "But Saul said you could help." "That's what we do," I said, "on good days." She paced. "You know about Lusk? About his final painting?" "Pieces," I said, "sometimes literal ones." She stopped pacing abruptly. "He gave it to me." Saul and I both straightened. "Lusk gave you Heart of the Ashes?" I asked. "Yes. He said Pell was becoming dangerous and Delia was compromised." She shook her head. "He didn't trust anyone. I was his only confidant. He said the painting held a truth everyone else wanted to bury." "Did you understand it?" "No, not fully, but I understood enough to hide it." She moved toward a patch of wall where plaster had recently been pried away. I removed the frame and concealed it in here. And 2 days ago someone broke in." Her voice cracked. The frame was gone. I exchanged a look with Saul, described the intruder. She closed her eyes, summoning the memory. Tall, clean shoes, expensive cologne. He moved with precision, not like an artist, like someone rehearsed at hiding guilt. When I shouted, he fled. Did you see his face? Yes. Her eyes snapped open, filled with terror and certainty. It was Brandon Kell. That dropped the temperature 10 degrees. Kell, Mr. Polished Gallery Manager, had just vaulted from obnoxious obstruction to leading suspect. And if he'd taken the painting, then he was holding the one thing everyone wanted and would kill to control. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. She laughed bitterly. And tell them what? That an art manager stole a surrealist painting that might contain a treasure map. They'd lock me up faster than they'd open a case file. Fair point. She moved to her table and picked up a small envelope. This is all I have left. She handed it to me. Inside was a torn corner of canvas. Familiar colours, crimson, soot-black, amber, swirled across it in Lusk's distinctive strokes. I recognized the pigment pattern instantly. It matched the burnt fragments left at the Brownstone and Delia's apartment. You're telling me, I said slowly, that the killer tore the painting apart and gave pieces to us as invitations? Yes, she whispered. Lusk believed Wolfe could decipher his code. Whoever has the painting believes it too. Which meant the killer wasn't just taunting us. They wanted Wolfe involved. Whether as a pawn, an obstacle, or the final target was uncertain, but none of the options came wrapped in ribbons. I pocketed the fragment, documenting it properly, of course, and stood. Miss Vale, you're in danger. You need protection, she shook violently. No. If Kell finds out I talked, then he'll have to explain why he's breaking into basements instead of attending gallery luncheons, I said. Wolfe won't let harm come to you. She didn't believe me, but she wanted to, and sometimes wanting is enough to get someone upstairs and out the door. Saul agreed to escort her to a safe address he kept in reserve. When they left, I headed straight for the Brownstone. Wolfe was at his desk when I arrived, chin lifted, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. The position meant either meditation or irritation. With Wolfe, the two frequently overlapped. I delivered the full report. Iris, the hidden painting, Kell, the break-in, the matching fragment. Wolfe's eyelids rose incrementally. So, he murmured. That's your reaction? I said. We find the missing artist, the missing painting, the missing motive, and all you give me is so? Wolfe ignored the remark. He reached for the canvas fragment with delicate disdain, holding it to the light. Lusk's layering technique was idiosyncratic. He applied pigments in cycles, crimson, ochre, soot, each layer representing a stage in his symbolic process. Artists, I said, should come with instruction manuals. He continued, unamused. If one analysed the layering, one could decipher which regions of the canvas are meant to be read spatially. A map, Mr. Goodwin, not metaphorically, literally. You're telling me, I said, that Lusk hid directions to the trust fund in an art piece? Yes. And Kell now has that treasure map? Yes. This is getting exciting, I said. Phooey. He leaned back. We must determine Kell's next action. He will attempt to decode the painting, but he lacks Lusk's methodology and Delia's catalogue knowledge. Therefore, he'll come to us. Wolfe's silence confirmed it. To lighten the room, and because the tension felt thick enough to slice, I wandered to the side table and accidentally rearranged Wolfe's beer bottles into letters that spelled ASH. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. Archie! I raised my hands. Artistic expression. He glowered, but a corner of his mouth twitched. Do not toy with my provisions. Before I could reply, Fritz appeared at the doorway, silent, dignified, and announcing dinner preparations with the gentle authority of a monarch. Wolfe rose with the grace of a displeased mountain, but just as we turned toward the dining room, the phone rang. Its timing was too sharp to be coincidence. Wolfe halted. I answered. Goodwin. A voice, a man's distorted low, whispered, The woman in the smoke talked. Now she will burn. The line went dead. Wolfe's expression hardened into something immovable. And dinner would have to wait. The kind of morning that makes law-abiding citizens feel productive usually makes criminals nervous, and judging from the way Brandon Kell nearly dropped his polished clipboard when I stepped into the Halcyon Gallery at 10:21, he qualified for the latter category. The place was its usual temple of tasteful pretension, Quiet lighting, curated shadows, air thick with the smell of money that had never seen real work. But Kell's calm cracked the moment he saw me. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, smoothing his tie, "this is becoming intrusive." "Beautiful word," I told him. "Let's see how it holds up under questioning. We found Iris Vale." His pupils shrank. Sweat prickled along his perfect hairline like an amateur confession. "I don't know who that is," he lied, crisp as a forged signature. "Oh, sure you do. Basement apartment, Lower East Side, broken plaster where a certain painting used to be. You remember, Heart of the Ashes? The one you stole?" His composure faltered entirely. This is absurd." "So is smoke that kills without burning," I said, taking a step forward. "So is Pell's death. So is Lusk entrusting his masterpiece to a woman you assume died conveniently. But hey, coincidences build character." Kell's breathing quickened. "I didn't kill Pell." "That's good. I haven't accused you yet. But Iris did." He flinched. Bad sign. I continued. "She saw your face. She smelled your cologne. She remembers the way you tore the wall apart like a man digging for absolution." "I did not." He broke off, glanced toward the rear hallway, and bolted. Usually, I enjoy pursuits that let me show off my graceful athleticism. Ask anyone, I run like a stylish hurricane. But chasing Kell down the storage corridor of a fancy midtown gallery wasn't on my wish list. Still, business is business. I followed him past crates stacked like oversized tombs, past wrapped canvases leaning like reluctant witnesses, until he stumbled and I pinned him between a crate marked fragile and a rolled canvas taller than Wolfe's ego. "Talk," I said. He panted. "I only took the painting to protect the gallery." "From what?" "From scandal." His voice cracked. "Lusk told Delia about the trust fund. She forged the documents to divert the money. I found out." He wiped his face on his sleeve. "I confronted her. She begged me not to go to the board, so I hid the painting. It was the only leverage I had." I stared at him. "That's creative, almost artistic." "It's the truth," he insisted. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you were after the fund yourself. We're at a fork in the fairy tale." His eyes darted toward an exit sign like it could deliver salvation. "Please, I wasn't at the Brownstone." "Oh?" I reached out, grabbed his wrist and turned it. His cuff bore a faint smear, dark, grainy with a glint of metallic residue. Soot, but not ordinary soot. The chemical tang hit my nose instantly. It matched the mix left on Wolfe's doorstep. Specialized, manufactured, not household. Kell saw my expression and jerked backward. I can explain." "Don't bother," I said. "We'll let the inspector enjoy the performance." Right on cue, a familiar growl echoed down the corridor. "Goodwin." Kramer and Stebbins marched in like twin storms. Kramer looked Kell over with impatience bordering on nostalgia for simpler crimes. "Brandon Kell, you're under arrest for burglary, obstruction, and interfering with an active investigation." "Not murder?" I asked. "Don't push it," Kramer snapped. "No evidence yet." Kell sagged in relief, so pathetic it almost annoyed me. Stebbins cuffed him and marched him out. Kramer turned to me. "Wolfe gets one thing. We cracked this burglary because he stuck his nose in. Tell him I said so." "Gladly," I said. "And Goodwin?" "Yes." "Don't go improvising heroics. You're not being paid enough to die." "I'll put that on Wolfe's invoice." He grunted and left. I stayed behind a moment, studying the smear on Kell's cuff. If he'd been at the Brownstone, he wasn't the mastermind. Too nervous, too sloppy, too rattled at Iris's name. But the soot, its odd metallic bite, buzzed in my mind. Wolfe would taste metaphor in it. I'd settle for chemistry. Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe sat in his office like a carved mountain contemplating valleys of lesser intellect. I placed the evidence bag on his desk. His nostrils flared. "Soot." "Special soot," I said. "The same that was on the doorstep. Kell had it on his cuff." "Indeed." Wolfe leaned back, pinched the bridge of his nose, then inhaled deeply. "Do you recall the composition of the fragments Miss Moresby brought?" "Chemical accelerant mixed with burnt pigment," I said. "You said it wasn't ordinary fire." "Correct. The residue contains molybdenum traces." "Sounds poisonous." "It is unpleasant," Wolfe agreed. "But more importantly, it is used in restoration kilns." I blinked. Art restoration? Yes, the type employed to heat-set pigments, rejuvenate aged varnish, or fuse layers of complex oils. He lowered his voice. Only one individual connected to this case maintains a private studio equipped with such a kiln. Marta Quill, I said. He nodded once. She was awfully eager to blame Delia, I added, practically auditioning for the role. Because she fears discovery, Wolfe said. If she acquired the painting, decoded the map, and staged these symbolic crimes to misdirect us, then her incentives are clear. Kill Pell, frame Delia, scare Iris, smoke us out, I summarized. Efficient. Wolfe's tone hardened. This woman will not hesitate to kill again. I whistled softly. That's a cheerful afternoon forecast. He glared at me. Mr. Goodwin, you will not approach her alone. Wouldn't dream of it, I lied. He scowled. Archie. Relax, I said. I'll behave. You will not, I grinned. Well, at least I'm consistent. Wolfe growled something in a language known only to disgruntled geniuses, then yanked the bell cord for Fritz like a man summoning reinforcements against idiocy. Fritz appeared with a tray of beer. Wolfe accepted his glass with the solemnity of a coronation. I opened mine and raised it. To soot, symbolism, and women with more secrets than safety. Wolfe didn't toast. He stared at the fragment of soot-dark fabric like it was a death certificate waiting to be signed, and as the bubbles fizzed, the air around us thickened, not with smoke, but with the certainty that the next move belonged to the killer. If you've never started your afternoon by visiting a warehouse where art goes to die or be reborn, depending on the temperament of its keeper, you've missed one of New York's more invigorating nightmares. At 3:16 sharp, Saul, Kramer and I stood outside Marta Quill's restoration studio, which looked less like a place for beauty and more like a hideout for someone who believed beauty should be threatened with fire before being allowed to exist. Kramer grunted. Let's get this over with. I don't like artists. As a species or just individually, I asked. Don't start. Saul pushed the door. It creaked open onto darkness and the faint, unmistakable scent of scorched pigment. Drying racks lined the walls like skeletal trees. Canvases hung in midair like silent jurors. A kiln glowed in the corner, its heat throbbing with the kind of intimate menace found in bad marriages and good crime scenes. And there she was, Marta Quill, critic, restoration expert, zealot in sensible shoes, stood before the kiln feeding a curled piece of canvas into the flames. Her silhouette flickered against the red-orange glow, her mouth moving in a feverish rhythm. When she heard us enter, she whipped around, eyes bright with manic purpose. "You can't have it!" she shouted. Kramer stepped forward. "Lady, put your hands where I can see them." But Marta grabbed the canvas and tried to run, straight toward the studio's back exit. She didn't get far. Saul intercepted her with the silent precision of a man who could catch a hummingbird without damaging its feathers. He pinned her arms gently but firmly. Marta thrashed. "Let me go! I have to finish it!" "Sure," I said. "We'll let you finish incriminating yourself, after you answer a few questions." Her breathing hitched. Sweat or kiln heat glistened on her forehead. "You were burning part of Heart of the Ashes," I said. "Why?" "Because," she panted, "it belongs to the true artists, not to thieves pretending reverence. Lusk wanted purity. He wanted the trust fund to support creation, not corruption." "Interesting philosophy," I said. "Just one flaw. People keep dying." She stiffened. "That wasn't me." "Pell inhaled enough smoke to choke a fire brigade," I reminded her, "and our brownstone got roasted like Sunday dinner." "I staged the smoke," she said defiantly, chin up. "Not the deaths. Symbolic demonstrations. Lusk believed destruction reveals truth. I only tried to reveal what had been stolen. The painting needed to be purified." Kramer muttered, "I hate artists." Marta twisted toward him. "Delia forged documents. Kell stole the painting. They wanted the trust fund for themselves. I needed to stop them." "By smoking Wolfe?" I asked. "Bold." "You were the only one who would see the symbols." She looked at me with feverish sincerity. "You and Wolfe. That's why I left the fragments." Saul tightened his grip. "Enough. Who killed Pell?" "Not me," Marta cried. "I found him collapsed. I thought he'd done it to himself. He used smoke all the time. I panicked and ran." "You panicked and left him to die?" She swallowed. "He was already dead." Kramer pulled out his notebook. Names. Give them. Her voice softened, almost reverent. Lusk left a coded note. Only Kell could decipher it. He was meant to reveal the fund to those worthy of it. I blinked. Kell? Our smug curator? He can barely decipher a lunch menu. You underestimate him, Marta hissed. He understood Lusk better than anyone, and he feared the truth. Kramer frowned. What truth? That the map wasn't a map. She smiled in that unnerving way zealots do before they start quoting manifestos. It was instructions, steps, a ritual to access the trust. Lusk believed art should be earned, not inherited. Kell was supposed to guard the path. This was the point where logic quietly excused itself and let symbolism run the interrogation. But Saul lifted one eyebrow, a sign that, however mystical Marta sounded, there was a thread worth pulling. I took another slow step around the kiln. The embers cast everything in pulsing reds. Something in the ash caught my eye, a second imprint in the dust near the base of the kiln. Footprints, not Marta's. A larger shoe, heavier tread, angled toward the back door. Inspector, I said, we've got company, past tense. Kramer kneeled beside me, flashlights sweeping the marks. Hell, someone else was here. Marta let out a small, triumphant sound. I told you, I'm not the killer. I only burn what must be reborn. That's comforting, I said, in a lunatic sort of way. Kramer stood, jaw set. Marta Quill, you're under arrest for tampering with evidence, obstruction, and arson-related misconduct. Stebbins will love booking you. Her shoulders sagged. You fools don't understand. Kell will finish what Lusk began. He has to. That, I said, is exactly what worries me. Kramer marched her out, muttering oaths that would curdle paint. Saul lingered, scanning the shadows. Someone beat her here, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed, and that someone isn't playing with symbolism anymore. Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe listened with his customary stillness. I described the kiln, Marta's confessions, Kell's supposed role as chosen decoder, and the extra footprints. When I paused, Wolfe spoke a single word. Phooey. That good? I asked. That dismal, he replied. He leaned forward, tapping the soot sample I'd collected. This narrative of artistic purity is merely a veil. Marta's zeal is genuine, but she is not our killer. She incites, but she does not execute. And Kell? Wolfe closed his eyes. Kell's involvement exceeds mere acquisition. If Lusk entrusted him with a coded note, and if Marta believed him custodian of the path, then Kell has played a deeper role. A villain with layers, I said, like a cake or an onion. Wolfe ignored me. Mr. Goodwin, someone else was present at that kiln. Someone comfortable with flame, symbolism, and staging death. We must prepare. Prepare for what? He opened his eyes. For the final movement of this grotesque composition. Before I could reply, Fritz appeared at the doorway, soft, grave, and announcing dinner with a tray. Ritual closure. But the room still smelled faintly of smoke, and the killer was one step ahead. The office smelled faintly of coffee, old paper, and that unmistakable tension that comes when a man knows everyone in the room is holding something they shouldn't. Wolfe had summoned them all, Delia Moresby, Brandon Kell, Marta Quill, Iris Vale, Kramer, and the usual collection of uniformed officers, and the air vibrated like a violin string on the verge of snapping. I stood just behind Wolfe's desk, observing the cast of guilty faces as if I were some sardonic conductor about to cue the orchestra of their confessions. Marta's eyes flickered nervously toward the kiln residue in my hands. Kell tried to maintain a veneer of imperious calm, and Iris clutched the remaining fragment of Heart of the Ashes like a talisman against disaster. Wolfe's chair creaked as he leaned forward, fingers steepled, eyes darting from one suspect to the other. You all have had your secrets, he began, voice smooth but lethal, and tonight we will see which are deserving of truth, and which merely serve deception. He paused, letting the words hang, and I swear the dust motes in the sunlight seemed to hold their breath. Delia fidgeted, fingers entwined as though she could strangle her own guilt, while Kell's polished jawline betrayed the first crack in his carefully maintained facade. Marta tried to look as if she belonged, yet her hands twitched, betraying the inner turmoil of a zealot who had overplayed her hand. Iris remained composed, though the fragment of canvas she held trembled slightly in her palm. "First," Wolfe continued, "Marta Quill, you have staged symbolic arson scenes and delivered threats through smoke and fragments, endangering this establishment and its occupants. You have not, however, committed homicide. Your zeal for artistic purity explains your actions, though it does not excuse the danger you created." Marta's lips pressed into a thin line, nodding in reluctant acknowledgement, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. Kell shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat glinting along his temple. Wolfe's gaze found him. "Brandon Kell," he said, voice lowering into a sharpened purr, "you discovered the location of Raymond Lusk's trust fund through his coded note. You killed Garrick Pell to prevent exposure. You used my brownstone as a stage, leaving fragments of the stolen painting to manipulate my involvement, believing my presence would redirect suspicion toward others, toward Pell, toward Delia." Kell paled, and I noted the subtle quiver in his fingers. That was the confession before the words were spoken. "Impossible," Kell blustered, though the tremor betrayed him. "I only acted to protect the gallery. Delia forged documents to divert the trust fund. You acted to preserve secrets by committing murder," Wolfe said, punctuating each word with a deliberate tap of his finger on the desk. "Delia's involvement was peripheral, but your intent was calculated." I stepped slightly forward, eyeing Kell's sleeve. The soot-stained cuffs told their own story, chemical residue matching the mixture we found on my earlier visits to Marta's kiln. He had burned segments of the painting after Marta left, attempting to cloak his trail under her zealotry. That single clue, subtle yet damning, provided Wolfe the leverage he needed. Kell's gaze darted to the cuffs as if he could erase the truth with a blink. Iris held the torn fragment before Wolfe, and he examined it closely. "This," he said, "completes the code. You see, Mr. Goodwin, the layering of pigments, strategically torn fragments, reveals the location of the trust fund, deposited 2 days after Lusk's death, now secured in a private account." He looked directly at Kell. "Your attempt at secrecy failed." Kell's eyes widened. Panic erupted behind the mask of composure. He made a move, lunging toward Wolfe's desk, perhaps to grab the fragment or perhaps to seize some imagined advantage. I reacted instinctively, stepping in and pinning him alongside Stebbins, whose solid bulk made escape impossible. Kramer barked orders, directing the officers to restrain the curator as the room hummed with tension. "You've got him, Wolfe," Kramer said, exhausted, cigar dangling from his lips. His voice carried a grudging respect that belied the fatigue in his eyes. "Finally, one of your brains at work, instead of mine running in circles." "Passably effective, despite your misgivings," Wolfe said, without acknowledging Kramer beyond the cool precision of his tone. Then he turned toward me. "Goodwin, despite your mischief and unfortunate rearrangement of my beer bottles yesterday, you have contributed adequately. The truth is now exposed." I remembered the small prank from the day before, when I'd quietly lined Wolfe's beer bottles into the letters ASH and caught the faintest flicker of amusement before he buried it. I chose to consider that a personal victory. Delia slumped with relief, Iris exhaled, and Marta's zeal drained into a puddle of remorseful comprehension. Kell, restrained, sputtered, but there was no denying the precision of Wolfe's deductions. The entire sequence, from smoke, fragments, misdirection, and zealotry, had been unveiled in the quiet grandeur of the Brownstone office. Wolfe, standing now, gestured to the assembled parties. "Let this be a lesson. Fire reveals truth. Ashes preserve secrets. And in my house, we allow neither deception nor violence to remain hidden." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. I watched him as he adjusted his waistcoat, the soft authority of his presence making every guilty party shift uncomfortably. Fritz appeared, as if summoned by unspoken command, with a tray of chilled beer. Wolfe accepted his glass with ceremonious precision and nodded toward me. "You may partake, Mr. Goodwin. You have earned this, not merely for your contributions, but for surviving the hazards you imposed upon yourself." I lifted my glass, hiding the small smirk of concealed affection behind the ritual of a toast. "To fire and truth, Mr. Wolfe," I said, "may both always burn bright." He gave a slight inclination of his head, one of those subtle acknowledgments that spoke more than any words he could muster. The room exhaled as the tension dissipated. Kramer, still standing near the doorway, lit his last cigar of the day and allowed a small, respectful nod toward Wolfe. "You got him, Wolfe," he repeated, "and you got the truth." As the officers escorted Kell to his formal detention, the fragments of art, zealotry, and smoke had been untangled, revealing a panorama of motives, methods, and madness. Marta would face consequences for her symbolic arson, yet her actions had been misguided devotion rather than lethal intent. Kell's greed and calculation had been exposed. Pell's death, tragic but instrumental in revealing the full scope of the conspiracy, was no longer a mystery. The Brownstone, bathed in the late afternoon light filtering through the office windows, seemed calm again, its usual rhythm restored. Wolfe returned to his desk, arranging the case files with the meticulous precision of a man who understood that order and clarity were the final arbiters of truth. I took a final glance around the room, noting the assembly of parties, the relieved and chastened faces, and the faint odour of chemical soot lingering like a ghost of the case. I reflected that some fires burn buildings, others burn lies, and in Wolfe's Brownstone truth always survives the heat.